today of the chapter 11, part 1, chapter 12, part 1 of Strayer. So I'll see you later for chapter 12, part 2 of the Strayer book. Okay, hope things are going well. Bye. What? Here we are. Welcome back, everybody. We're on chapter 12 of Strayer now, talking about this great chapter called Milestones of the Past Century, War and Revolution. 50 years of history here, shaping the world in the 20th century. This is the second to last chapter we're really going to dig in this class. So, and this chapter is going to take a long time. First part I'm going to talk about here in part 1 is World War I. So I'll give you a little bit of background about that. We've covered this in class, so sit back, relax. Hopefully you've read the chapter, and this is just a nice review for you. Let me take a little sip of my tea here. Oh yeah, vanilla rooibos. Good, hits the spot. Okay, on this cold winter day. All right, so let's get going here. So we have this section of the book called The First World War, a European Crisis with a Global Impact. So it's important to know the years. You know, for this class, we don't obsess over dates. We do like chronology, but if you want to choose some dates to remember, World War I's not a bad one, 1914 and 1918. Kind of the end of the big rush for imperialism in the world. Think about the Europeans coming in the late 19th century. We kind of like use this date as a changing date here for the College Board, 1914. And then we're going to just go from 1914 on to the end of the class, basically. So this is taking us into this modern or postmodern era, we like to say, coming after World War II. So this chapter is all about kind of carrying us through World War I, World War II, the time in between, the Russian Revolution, so much to talk about in this chapter. But let's talk about World War I, kind of the beginning of it, how it happened. So we all know, as we talked about it in class, we played our little simulation game, that there were two main sides. It was a war that did originate in Europe, but it did encompass much of the world, either by taking fighting to other places or bringing people from other places to Europe, as we'll continue to learn about. So there's these two big rivalries that'll happen in Europe, and the countries are based on two sides due to these alliances. We want to remind ourselves that Europe has just gone through this age of industrialization. New nations have emerged because of nationalism as a unifier. The two big ones, as you see here, are Germany and Italy. Germany being the big nation whose existence, when it comes to fruition in 1870, after defeating France in the Franco-Prussian War, really changes the landscape of Europe to the present day. So this is a unification of all these German-speaking states, if you will, that finally happens, a dream of many that happens at this time after they defeat France and get a little bit more land from France that they wanted. And this land is called, part of this land that's really important for World War I is Alsace-Lorraine, this area between Germany and France that has people who have been taken back and forth between these two countries for years, French and German speaking. And in this case, after the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, basically the French and German War, because Prussia is the largest part of Germany, that kind of leads the way to German unification. When Germany wins against France, or Prussia wins, they take Alsace-Lorraine, and France is very bitter, and this is a big goal of France in World War I is to get that back. But that might be a bit of a digression for this class, more of a kind of a European history geek thing. What's important to remember, there's two sides. First, they're called the Triple Alliance, which we call the Central Powers once the war gets going, and then the Triple Entente. So we know these. We'll look at a map in a second. But we have for the Triple Alliance of the Central Powers are Germany, obviously, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. But the big three, the first three I mentioned, are the ones that are really the most important to remember. Germany is really leading the way on that. And then the allies would be France, Great Britain, and Russia, who are thrown together sort of and with a very kind of light, not super strong alliance, but they're brought together by having the common enemy of Germany and Austria-Hungary. So we all know that it starts with a spark of Franz Ferdinand. I showed you, I visited that site last summer in Sarajevo, beautiful city in Bosnia. Highly recommend you go there. If your parents say, hey, where do you want to go this summer? Go anywhere. You should go to Bosnia, Sarajevo, Bosnia. It's not very much visited by people from our side of the world here. And we also talked about the main causes of the war. So if we think of Franz Ferdinand as the spark, that ignited the the gasoline on the ground, or for California, the dead trees in the forests. Might be too close to home for some of us, but basically the spark that set off that fire would be the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. But the fuel for that fire are the main causes, right? Militarism. We know that European countries are rapidly developing their militaries, and they have an arms race, particularly Germany and Great Britain. They build a ship, we build a ship, right? So they have these large militaries. As militaries are developed larger and larger, they start to take on a kind of a direction of their own, and they want to prove their existence, and they want to show why they are necessary. And so going to war is a great thing. For militaries really push leaders to war. They're not super reluctant about going to war, which sometimes is how things are portrayed in the film. But the reality is, if you have a strong, powerful military, most of the time those people are very excited to fight. So that's one thing, militarism. The other is the alliances we just talked about. You're much more likely to go to war if you're dragged into it because of an alliance, and you're much more confident to declare war if you're Serbia, not declaring war, but if you're Austria and you're Serbia, you're willing to risk war with Austria if you feel like you have somebody to back you up. And then imperialism, if you have colonies around the world, sometimes you covet what your enemy might have. You might think, I'm going to get that through war, but also there are conflicts that happen in these colonies as they're right next to each other. And then finally, nationalism. Nationalism as a unifier, we saw that with Germany and Italy, but it also can be a divider. Particularly, we see this in Austro-Hungarian Empire, which at times is called the madhouse of nationalities. If I am a Serbian, like Gavrilo Princip, the assassin of Franz Ferdinand, I might think starting a war will help bring to the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Serbians in that area in Bosnia will be unified with Greater Serbia. We will create a country, we might call it Yugoslavia, which we'll see actually does happen, but not the way that Franz Ferdinand's assassins wanted. But still, nationalism is a thing that really propels people to fight. If I am French, I'm excited to fight for my nation. We saw that in the French Revolution. That is something that continues. If I'm German, I'm happy to fight for my nation. If I'm British, and so on. So it's a motivator to fight for your nation, but it's also a motivator to start the war in the first place. And a lot of these people want their independence, or what we call their self-determination. So if I'm a small national group like Poland, per se, which was divided up in the late 18th century by Russia, Prussia, and Austria, perhaps I would like to see my nation get its independence again. This is nationalism as a form of self-determination. We see that with a lot of the ethnic groups in Austria-Hungary. Hungarians want to break away from the influence of the Austrians. And we see it in the Ottoman Empire as well, where we have people, Arabic-speaking people, who would like to have their independence from the Turks who are ruling from afar. So these are all big reasons for the causes here, okay, for the war. So these are the big empires again. This is again in your book. I don't think we need to dwell on this, but you can kind of see the influence there. This is the map of the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente, or the Central Powers and the Allies. And again, don't need to obsess over this. Know that the Ottoman Empire does end up joining the Central Powers as the war moves on. Italy leaves the Triple Alliance and joins the Allies, because they're promised land right here in Austria. So if you go up into parts of Italy, even to this day, today, you'll see that a little bit of this land over here is actually part of Italy now. It's very fascinating because a lot of us like to go there, to go up into the Alps, to call them the Dolomites, and do Via Ferrata, do skiing, do rock climbing. And we go to these towns, and they have two names. They have a German name and they have an Italian name. And a lot of people there don't speak Italian as their preferred first language. Even to this day, they'll speak a dialect of German or some other local dialects because they were absorbed later into Italy after World War I, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so let's talk about kind of what the expectations were, the outcomes, the legacies of this war. We'll go into more details in class, but again, I'm just kind of sticking to what's in the book right now. Again, I guess I'll go back here for a second. So I'm sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit. So we do want to remind ourselves, just kind of a little background, that Serbian nationalists assassinated Franz Ferdinand in 1914, June of 1914. And because of that, Austria was kind of excited. Franz Ferdinand was the nephew of the Emperor of Austria, Franz Joseph, and he was excited to have an excuse to declare war on as his nephew's assassins' country. These guys had come from Serbia. There's a lot of evidence to link leaders in the Serbian government to plotting this assassination, and the Serbians kind of said it wasn't them, it was just rogue citizens. But either way, Austria declared war, and that kind of brought the whole continent, if you will, into the war, because Serbia felt was going to be supported by its larger Slavic Orthodox big brother, if you will, Russia, and Austria is supported by Germany. And we kind of break down the factors for how this falls into play here and how the war breaks down. But next thing you know, Germany is invading France, and Britain's involved in the war, and the entire continent practically is pulled into this conflagration. Again, if you want to geek out on that, we talked about that in class, but you can definitely look that up more. So when we get to the outcomes of the war, as the fighting happens, a lot of people thought when the war started in July 28th, so a month after the assassination, they declared war. That is Austria on Serbia, and the fighting began. And a lot of people thought the fighting was going to be over by Christmas time, by the holidays, December, if you will, of 1918. So remember, this is starting like in July. Everybody went out into the streets in their nations, and they were excited, right? Let's give them what's for, as the British would say. Let's defeat them very quickly. Let's show them how tough we are. The Germans did this. There's a very famous picture, actually, in Munich of Germans in the streets, and Adolf Hitler is in that picture that a photographer happened to take by chance. So there's people all over Europe that are excited to fight. They're excited to see their young men go to war. They haven't really grasped the degree to which modern weaponry, industrial weaponry, is going to bring such great destruction and the loss of lives and disfigurement of bodies and so on. But the war does not end by the end of 1914. In fact, it goes all the way till the end of 1918, until November 11th, 1918, when the war is finally over. In that time of 4 years, 10 million, mostly men, are killed in battle, more are wounded, twice as many, and millions of civilians are killed, actually. Nothing like in World War II, but it is important to know that a lot of civilians did die in World War I, just more soldiers died than civilians in World War I, which is the opposite of World War II, as we'll learn. More civilians died than soldiers. So in this war, though, we see something called total war. What country you're in doesn't matter. If you're in that country, you are doing something to support the war effort. We think of, we're in the United States today. Our country has been at war many times in your lifetime, be it in Afghanistan, Iraq. We have soldiers all over the world. Sometimes we don't know where they are. But what we do know is that unless we have family in the military, our lives are not affected by these wars. But back then in this war, and then in World War II later, people's lives were affected greatly in terms of the rationing of resources, what they can buy, what they had to do to support the war effort, recycling programs, labor union support of the war. This is where we see the end of socialism for a while, because socialism is supposed to be the brotherhood of all workers and working class people, be they German or Russian or French. Well, it didn't work out that way. It turns out the people were more proud of their nation, so it divided up any sort of workers groups, and even labor unions supported the war effort for their countries, and the countries in return gave the labor unions a lot of leeway, gave them a lot of laws to give them greater rights, and workers got wages, particularly in Great Britain. In Germany, the country was run by the military at one point. The Kaiser gave control to his generals, and they ran the country very efficiently. But that means that every resource there is going to go to the military first, and then the civilians next. So the civilians get less stuff during the war in World War I. Germany is embargoed. That is, the Allies, the British, put up a trade embargo around Germany. They stopped ships from coming in with food supplies, and so there's a lot of evidence to suggest that shows, and the Germans exaggerated this for sure, but hundreds of thousands of civilians starved to death. They just didn't have enough food. Their food supplies went down. So this is, again, total war. Everybody's getting affected. Ottoman Empire, 1 million Armenians are killed and one of the early genocides in Europe in this time. Not the first one in the world for sure, but certainly this idea of killing a group of people in large numbers to get them removed from an area. Some people get caught up in the term between ethnic cleansing and genocide, but what happened to the Armenians is pretty much without a doubt considered a genocide, which we'll talk about that more in class. So a lot of things are happening here. People, because of all the death and suffering that happens in the war, some intellectuals who thought, oh, the Enlightenment, we're moving forward, progress, everything's going to be great, we're solving all these problems in the world. We went from Renaissance, scientific revolution, Enlightenment, here we are in the Industrial Age. They went, oh, we use all these industrial weapons, all these great scientific achievements to kill a lot of people. What's wrong with our world? So there's a lot of disillusionment, loss of hope. There's also a lot of social change. Women came into work when men were gone. When the men came back, most of the women lost those jobs. But because women were so supportive of the war effort, especially in the United States and Britain, they got the right to vote. So women's suffrage came back in those countries. Later in France, definitely in Russia they got it when Russia became a communist country, although you could only vote for one party, the Communist Party, but women got the right to vote. And there's also a rise in consumerism. This is a time after the war where we're able to buy what we want when we want, kind of the society we still have today. So these are all kind of big outcomes of